Tell me how you'd like to be introduced, please.
An attorney, a voting rights advocate, and a business owner trying to disrupt, the two-party system.
Winners never quit, and quitters never win.
Quitters win all the time. Let us show you how on Quit Happens.
Hey everyone, Lynn Marie here. Thanks for joining me for the next episode of Quit Happens. On this episode, we have Chad Peace. He is an attorney for the Independent Voter Project, president of IVC Media, a nonpartisan digital media company, and a founding board member of the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers. Now, I have to be totally honest here. I may have invited Chad on as a means of sneaking some nonpartisan election reform into Quit Happens, but as is the case with all my other guests, regardless of what they've been invited on for, it somehow seems that they always end up saying something super insightful about strategic quitting, and Chad is no different. So, if you want to hear a little bit about Chad's take on strategic quitting and a little more about nonpartisan election reform, you, my friends, are in for a treat. As always, if you like what you hear and you'd like to read more, please visit me at quittingbydesign.com online or at Quitting by Design on Facebook and Instagram. Now, without further ado, here's the episode with Chad Peace.
I'm ready.
All right. Thanks for joining us, Chad.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, Chad and I go not way back, but back-ish. And we were recently in New Orleans for an election reform conference with the rest of the IVN crew. And as people would ask about my book, which I just found out is coming out in the summer, Chad would pipe up and gloat that he was the first place that I quit after publishing the book. Which is true. Chad is my former boss, but that's why I know a lot of his quitting story, but not all of it. So some things that I'll hear today will be new.
Nobody bossed you.
No, but oh!
That's for damn sure.
Chad is my former employer / check signer if I was unable to be boss. Beautiful. Okay, Chad, if you wouldn't mind taking us back to, let's say, when you first had a significant quit that led you onto the path you are on now.
I quit one of my first jobs. It wasn't my first, but I actually worked in commercial real estate, looking over addendums to leases and things like that for a pretty large fast food company. And it was good. It was a great job for somebody my age in my early 20s, and got every other Friday off, was making too much money for that age, had too much free time. And I just decided to quit it because I was watching the presidential debates and my friend kept saying, "You got to watch the Republican primary debate." I'm like, why the heck would I want to watch the Republican primary debate? So he bugged me over and over. And by the way, this is my current business partner I'm talking about. So I go and I watch. And I'm watching the debate, and everybody's saying the exact same thing. We need to get the terrorists. We need to do this. We need to do that. And then all of a sudden, there's this congressman from Texas on the stage talking about we're losing our civil liberties, and we need to protect our civil rights. And then he gets laughed at on the stage and by the audience. And then the commentators after the debate basically saying, "Oh, don't listen to Ron Paul. He's a whack job." And I go, well, I thought a lot of this stuff he said made a whole lot of sense. Long story short, he asked me, why did I quit my job? I quit because I was like, this is good and all. I'm getting paid okay at Jack in the Box. But you know what? Here's somebody trying to combat a narrative that everybody's got to agree with something, and whoever agrees with it the most is the person that we should elect to represent us. And he said, well, why don't we stop and think about things for a little bit? So I quit to go help the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of other people across the country who were thinking the same thing, and started groups back in Facebook back in 2008, started doing money bombs to raise money for him outside of the campaign. I said, well, he deserves some support. I'm young. I don't have a wife and kids I got to take care of, and I'll figure the rest out later.
Nice. Now, to give some background, what was your political leaning at the time? And for those of you who don't know, Chad was brought up in a household that was not apolitical, we'll say. His father is a politician, so...
I hate that term.
His father was a representative of some sort?
Well, my father was a Democrat that represented a very conservative district. My mother comes from a very conservative, proud Republican family. And so we had some interesting debates across the dinner table. So I think part of it is my perspective was framed by really understanding and having been a part of the conversation that goes beyond what you hear on TV about politics. And then also hearing like people who within the family had strong disagreements who would argue, yell, have it out with each other. And then 30 minutes later, hey, what are we going to do today? How did that go at school, right? And realizing you have to disconnect yourself from things that you think are the right answer from then imposing somebody who doesn't agree with you, imposing some kind of evil motive or something to the rationale for why they don't agree with you. So I think that perspective has framed a lot of, how I got into politics and what I believe from my frame of mind now.
Gotcha. So when you decided to leave your job and go support Ron Paul, were there any fears that this wouldn't be successful or that some people in your family would be concerned that you were leaving a good job? Any fears associated with that quit?
I didn't really anticipate that question, but...
Despite me totally telling you I was going to ask you.
You can't say you're going to ask me that question, grounded in fear.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was your thought process surrounding that?
No, I think it's a good way you asked the question. To be honest, I didn't really have that much fear at that age. I should have. I mean, I've given up a great opportunity. I could climb a corporate ladder. I'm sitting in the real estate legal department in my young 20s, and I really kind of guided myself, I think, at that point in my life by things will work out. If you just follow what you think is doing the right thing, things will work out. I know that sounds warm and fuzzy, and I'm not necessarily saying that that's the right approach to life. But at that point, I just did, and I was like, I'm young. I like to think that I'm not stupid at least, and have some things to offer that if I go out and do this, I'll figure out something to do that'll support myself later in my life. But right now, I can go do this. And I really didn't have this, probably didn't think enough about what the consequences were, to be honest.
Well, that's cool. That's totally fair. I think the last podcast guest I had on who moved to Bali at age 26 for a new career, same thing. If you don't have a lot of responsibilities, you just believe that it's going to happen one way or the other. Sometimes that's the perfect time to not do it, strategic quit, because strategically your job is, I'm just going to follow my intuition, and you're not leaving anybody else in a lurch. That's fine. Like you said, you were single and you had probably saved some money from the good job.
Well, my next quit was more strategic. And by the way, I think that whole experience is frames now. I'm actually I don't think that way at all. I'm probably overly conservative about what and why I do things, realizing there are consequences to just following what you feel is good at the day. But my second strategic quit was actually going back out of politics, or at least so I thought at the time, because I had run into the issue. You go into there and then you get into ideologically driven politics. And it really, at that point in my life, framed my mind that, there's this pursuit of this thing. And if we just advocate, we go for it, and it's going to take over the world and everybody's going to be great, once they embrace it, and you realize, your view of life gets rejected soundly. And then you start questioning some of the things within what you believed and realize, man, I was so thought I was so right about all this stuff. And, there's a good point being made over there that why that wouldn't work or this and that. And then you start questioning it all. And so it's almost the flip side of the quit in the first place was, if you just go with it right now and you don't question it, things will work out. And then going, well, I didn't question things enough, and so I just accepted, right? Yeah. And so the next strategic quit was quitting that world and going back to law school strategically, because I still didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, but I knew that law school would provide a platform to really pursue whatever direction you really wanted to. And there was, at least in my mind, there wasn't any super bad consequences other than the debt that you end up with when you're done.
Right. That's true. So at this point, how are you identifying politically? Because you just had helped somebody who was technically running in the Republican platform, but is probably, more commonly identified as a libertarian. Where did you land? You said you'd been raised in a Republican and Democrat split household. What was your view on partisan politics at this point?
Well, I just thought my view of partisan politics was that they manufacture a narrative. Now, this is why I'm in the business of politics myself, is I think we can change it. But because I've been so close to politics, I look at politics not just by what they're saying, but the mechanics of why they're saying that and why, right? It's all part of campaign to get into office, campaign to stay into office, and doing all that. So I don't try not to look at the people by exactly what they're saying maybe at every moment, but understand that most of the people who are there, most of the people in politics, one, you don't have to accept this, but I believe they are genuinely good. There's bad actors that ruin for everybody, and they're on both sides, and they take advantage of things. But most people are good. And so a lot of people are saying, they do want to revolutionize the world. There's the revolutions in their minds that they want to fight, right? But in order to put themselves in a place where they can go and win office and be effective, you have to chip away at things slowly. So because they're not embracing your issue completely right now, knowing that if I do that, I could get attacked by my own party, attacked by a special interest group. The media might spin me off and say I'm a kook. And so I won't win re-election. And you know what? If I'm not in office, I can't help you at all, right? So it's coming from that. That's, what am I personally right now? I kind of think I have some small L libertarian tendencies, which, I generally believe that people should be able to do what they want if they aren't harming other people. But I've distanced myself from the ideological acceptance of that libertarian position, where there's all kinds of exceptions, and there's reasons why, everything. I used to. One example, and maybe I'm exposing too much personal stuff, is I was like, you can't ban smoking in restaurants. It's the restaurant owner's right, and if they don't want to, and if a customer doesn't like it, well, don't go there. And if a worker doesn't like it, well, don't work there, right? That's the libertarian position. But they banned smoking in California, one of the first states, and now it's banned almost anywhere. And whether you smoke or not, I find it hard-pressed for somebody to say it's not better now than it was before, right? So, I'd be called a socialist by hardline libertarians for recognizing that was maybe a good thing for society. So I only bring that up in that my point is you have to ground yourself. There's a perspective. There's probably most likely a good person giving that perspective. And even if you don't agree with them, there's all kinds of things, the variables that might be leading them to a conclusion that's different than yours.
Yeah. I didn't give necessarily much background at the beginning of this, but Chad is the attorney for the Independent Voter Project, and I started volunteering for IVP when they were doing Measures K&L back in 2016. Some of you who are my Facebook friends from back there would be well familiar with me promoting that ad nauseum. Luckily, it passed, which is awesome. But at the time, I was still registered a Democrat. And after that, I ran for a state level assembly delegate, something. Whatever I had been for Bernie Sanders on the national level, I ran for at a local level, which is still a Democratic Party position. And I didn't get it. And I'm actually very thankful for that, because that led to me having a conversation with Chad about a lot of the things that the Democratic Party participated in that I had to deal with at the convention. I didn't believe in. I was a Bernie Sanders person. He actually wasn't a true Democrat. He's either an independent or a democratic socialist. Like, however you look at it, he's probably not that much of a Democrat. So why was I doing all these things that were super within the party? And so Chad was one of the people who let me kind of see the light. And so a few months ago, I quit the Democratic Party, which as a person, I think I mentioned this on another podcast, but I was raised super hardcore Republican. So it took like years for me to quit the Republican Party and vote Democrat and register Democrat. So it was a thing I had been proud of for a long time. But then it was another, legitimate quit, because he was right. The party system isn't doing us any favors. In fact, they're doing us a lot of harm. And through the Bernie Sanders campaign, I could see that. So Chad is very much responsible for one of my, not that it's a significant quit that anybody else knows about, but it's different to be a no party preference, independent type person.
Yeah, well, it's different. I mean, we get attacked by both parties, third parties, and even independents because of what Independent Voter Project did in California, which changed the statewide election from a partisan-based one to a nonpartisan-based one. That sounds wonky, but you explain it in simple terms. I've never, I don't think quitting the party is necessarily the answer. And there's legitimate people on the left and the right that their perspective is, well, if we want change, these are the two vehicles to do it. And we need to reform within the party. And if our voice isn't in the party, then the party's really going to go off the rails. I think you, like a lot more people, are saying, we've been there, done that, tried that, screw it, I'm out. Right? What California's primary does now, because it's nonpartisan, is allows you to make that choice and still vote at the first stage of the election when your vote's really powerful. You select the candidates that are going to be on the general election ballot.
Yeah, let me pause. He's talking about the sub-presidential primary. For those of you Bernie Sanders people who are just like, no, you can't.
Now, there's lots of grievance to be had that with the current presidential primary, which gets much further complicated. But that's the point. The grievance with the presidential primary is most simply the rules are determined by the two parties, which are, the private parties, have their private rights and all that. But they determine the rules. And as a consequence, a lot of voters had troubles figuring out what they could and they couldn't vote in the presidential primary. So I have some things I would like to change about that myself. But that's why people kind of eyes can glaze over when you start saying partisan primary, nonpartisan primary, this and that. But the fact is, if you think that the system doesn't represent us, then understanding how the power structure can use the difference between a partisan primary and a nonpartisan primary to diminish the power of voters is important and significant.
Yeah, everybody out there should realize that this episode is essentially just gratuitous for me to be able to get this message out. I had to find a quit somewhere in Chad's past so that I could, so we could squeeze the California,
we're supposed to talk about quitting.
the California primary into Quit Happens podcast. But okay, we will morph a little bit into quitting here. So Chad, from law school, give us a little bit of how you got from there to where you are now, so that I can go into some other quits that are tangentially related.
Well, in law school, I was approached by the Independent Voter Project to help them with their voter communications, their voter education on the nonpartisan primary. And they said basically, hey, all that stuff you guys did for Ron Paul and the libertarian stuff, can you apply that to election reform? And they said, well, I'm in law school, but all right. Put together a plan, and it passed, so I like to take credit for it as much as I can, even though there was a lot of circumstances and people that were outside of my control that helped make it happen. But that's how I got involved back into kind of political stuff and reform.
And from there, how did that lead to IVC?
Well, IVC Media was the company I'd set up to do that and a couple other things, right, in order to do the work. And then it was shortly after we started that somebody would say, hey, can you do that for me? Hey, can you do that for me? And before I knew it, we were a company with 5 or 6 people showing up every day. It wasn't really my intention. It just kind of happened.
And now you're a company with like 13, 14 people showing up every day.
I think we're at 16 or 17 now because the last couple weeks.
Oh, that's right. I've been gone a while.
Yeah, but it's going well. And we have a very diverse, ideologically diverse office. I think that represents kind of the spirit of the perspective.
Yes, that is very accurate. And by the way, remember, we can edit.
Got to quitting.
We haven't got to go. I was just going to say, well, because the quitting part.
I'm going to quit talking about politics.
Okay. Have there been any quits related to IVC that were significant or difficult?
Besides yours?
Yeah. Touche.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's, especially when you're a young company, you try to take on the work to prove yourself. And everything's not just a calculus by how much they're paying you. It's, how much does this help advance really what our business purpose is? Is it how much is proving this for them might be an opportunity to do something else, right? And so there's a bunch of factors. But at some point, you get a client that you may even care about, and you don't think they're bad people, but it's, this isn't really a healthy thing for a business, right? Either their expectations are too high or the things that, they may be doing something that's really contrary to your company's culture, or maybe other factors that, are everything from their own legal issues or their own debt issues or whatever it is that are completely outside of your control. And as much as you want to help them, you have to do the calculus of not only is this a good relationship, but is expending really good people's resources and our team coming to the office to work on something that, is great of a vision and how much you want to help them, never going to be able to come to fruition because of their own limitations, at least in your perspective of the client. At what point do you just say, I have to cut this off, and sure, there may be revenue that I got to give up, or sure, there might be a vision that of seeing something that could be much greater that you just have to say, you know what, that vision is just never going to come to reality, and make the call and say, look, the consequence of keeping that vision in your mind, the consequence of seeing the potential and working on this is compromising 14 other visions and one big vision for the entire company. And so it's going and just saying, you know what, I have to cut that part of my life and my company off and move on, because there's lots of opportunities here, and can't keep one like that keeping you back.
Yeah. How do you go through that? Do you send them to another company, or do you kind of wrap up the ends that you have going on with them?
Well, I think when it comes to client relationship is too, it's just similar to my perspective on politics and everything is, that it's not like you're good and they're bad because you want to end the relationship. I mean, it's just understanding that it's circumstances, a lot of it, and maybe there's stuff you disagree with, whatever it is. And even if you don't like them, even if there's no advantage to telling them to go pound sand and go on your way and go on your merry life. It's okay being honest about this isn't working out. We have a willingness to end this stuff. And what's everything we can do from now until the next 2 weeks or whatever it is to at least put you in a place where you're as best off as you could be, but just we're not going to be there anymore, right? And I think you've taken that approach, and I think having that amicable quit is a good approach, and it saves you from all the fighting and the bickering, and you owe me $5.58 and blah, blah, blah. It's at the end of the day, if you're running a company, whatever monetary fight you might have on a single client at the end is going to be dust in the long term. It's not going to affect the long term. So whether it's $5 or $10,000, which I know is a lot to a lot of people, whatever it is, depending on the size of your business, you just have to accept, just who cares? Who cares? Move on, right? Okay, I lost a few bucks that I think were righteously mine. Give it up, move on. You're going to save that much money in headache and business and everything by not having to deal with the argument over it.
Yeah, absolutely. Some clients that you find are just raising your stress level beyond normal.
Yeah.
Like you said before with the Ron Paul thing, at the time you followed your intuition, right? Like, this is what I feel is right at this point. And is that still one of the guiding principles when you make these decisions?
Well, I think that's the thing, is it's more calculated now than it was. It wasn't just purely based on feeling. It's also based on like a real calculation. I don't mean in the mathematical sense, but like thinking about all the variables. How does this client serve the long term? How do they fit within the structure of the company now? So it's, you all get that moment, and when you start the process of thinking something isn't right? I might want to break up with this person, or, this might not be the right class I'm taking in college, or I didn't pick the right major, right? You don't just quit because you woke up one day. You start the process at some point, right? So it's saying you start that process, recognizing it, that something's wrong because I'm starting to think about this, understanding why it is, and then putting the pros and cons of it and saying, okay, when that moment, when you can't possibly justify doing this because the cons so far outweigh the pros, is saying this, whatever vision or other attachment or desire I have for this is not rational at that point. And I just need to accept that, look, I've made the calculus. If I made a mistake, it's not going to end my life. But this equation is saying that you probably need to get on.
You just summed up strategic quitting beautifully.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Well,
Can't wait to read the book.
Yeah. Chad has a number of copies coming to him. I really appreciate you chatting with us because you have a nice logical perspective. And so I think a lot of people who are not quite the, sage burning set will really appreciate hearing quitting from you.
I've burned sage before.
That is accurate. Okay.
I have one of those things that give the humidity with like lavender scents in my house too.
I'm gonna stop right here and point out that Chad called it the thing that gives humidity and a diffuser.
Yeah, that's what it's called.
Yes, between the sage and the diffuser, Chad is like one step away from going to Burning Man and hanging out at Haight-Ashbury. Well, I really appreciate the way you sum things up, and I'm super glad to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, until next time, happy quitting.